Good afternoon, everyone. I really feel honored to join you today, and I will walk you through a few slides. And what will be great is if you can just kind of share your comments in the chat, and then we can cover those during the following breakout session, so that I can answer kind of any questions that you may have, but also getting your perspectives and views on whether any of the trends that we're currently observing on a global scale are actually resonating with you in Asia Pac. So I will now share my screen. What we thought for the session today was to kind of provide a view of the big trends that we're seeing in the digital space, and then Anil being very deep, in the digital transformation and strategy at Google can bring to life a little bit more about his experience in the specific areas when it comes to digital transformation. Now, as we all know, COVID is actually changing the way we live, the way we work, the way we engage with each other, but also our relationship with technology. And from a digital strategy and transformation perspective, what this means is that the data and the technology ecosystem in which we operate is constantly evolving and is likely to evolve and change in the coming months and potentially also in the coming years. And so if we want to future-proof our businesses, we actually need to be able to understand the new reality that we're currently operating in, but also being able to anticipate the new waves of disruption and innovation that are likely to happen in the near and then longer-term future. Now, if we look at the reality as of today, there are three kind of phenomena that are reshaping the digital world. The first one is that we are generating way more data than before, and the majority of this data, circa 80-90%, is actually unstructured. Now, all of us actually appreciate the value of unstructured data, but the reality is that the majority of businesses do not have the infrastructure and the technologies that are sufficiently sophisticated and with sufficient computational power to accurately extract meaningful insights from this data. And so we have the 95% of businesses still see the management of unstructured data as being one of the key challenges. The other phenomena that we're seeing is that COVID has actually changed our behaviors. And so we are generating new types of data. From an organizational perspective, this represents a huge pool of information because organizations know way more about ourselves than before. They know how we operate and behave in a business as usual context, but also how we react when we are kind of facing and addressing uncertainty and an emergency situation. And what this means is that organizations can actually build on those insights to future-proof their business, being more agile, flexible, and also kind of read the early signs of changes in the environment and consumer behavior that may anticipate actually disruption and innovation and a change in the sector where they operate. The third phenomena is that we're actually seeing a deeper tension and, in a way, dichotomy between the part of the business that is still traditional and is still catching up with a few traditional challenges around legacy systems, which are now obsolete, or data quality, data governance, and data management. And that part of the organization that is actually willing to invest and embrace innovation and basically leave the old ways behind. And so this tension is actually triggering some concerns in policymakers around the readiness of organizations to fully embrace new technologies in a controlled way. And that's why we're seeing the emergence of the topic of ethics in data, ethics in technology, as being really front of mind for a number of policymakers across the world, including the Singaporean one. And I will give you a snapshot of what is going on in the region later in the presentation. Now, this phenomenon are also resulting in 5 new digital trends, and it would be great, again, when we have the breakout session to get your views on whether those resonate with you and the companies you work for. So tech is now everywhere, and this is new for many of us, but actually what we're seeing is that new kind of types of people are approaching technology. As an example, the elderly that are not as tech savvy as the younger generations are now way more willing to accept and embrace technology. And so kind of giving consideration to how the approach to technology has changed across the population is quite important when we're thinking the digital strategy. For some organizations, digital strategy has always been a must-have, but for others, it has been a nice-to-have, and now it is no longer the case. So this is actually an imperative for organizations if they want to survive. And in fact, we are actually living in an environment where we have the so-called survival of the fittest kind of phenomenon. And so organizations are really pushing hard on digital because they want and they need to reinvent themselves. As we mentioned, we are seeing also an acceleration in innovation and in the appetite to innovate, but we're also seeing a shift in the tech talk. So some of the technologies that were not really a priority in our tech talks before are actually now becoming more common in our day-to-day conversations. As an example, delivery drones. And if you're interested in knowing more about how the tech talk has shifted, there is an interesting study by the World Economic Forum with the Boston Consulting Group, and Jack will share later after the session. And then last but not least, tech for good. We are demystifying technology. We're actually embracing technology as a force to change and improve our lives. And this is really kind of powerful, but at the same time, we know that there are some risks and challenges with scaling up so quickly. And that's why we need to govern these technologies in the right way. Now, as KPMG, we launched a global study on emerging technologies in August 2020. That we called Enterprise Reboot. And we interviewed more than 600 executives across the world, including Asia Pac. And what came out of that exercise and engagement with executives is that business priorities have actually shifted. So while the business case for digital transformation before was driven and underpinned by customer excellence, innovation, cost optimization, operational resilience, and a few others, now the number one priority from a business case perspective is actually survival. And the other kind of aspect and topic that we covered quite extensively with these C-suites is the importance of the business case. So what COVID is actually resulting in is a shift in culture when it comes to digital strategy and transformation, and an increased discipline and scrutiny on the business case, and the ability to introduce quantifiable measure to prove that that investment in technology will actually deliver benefits in the short term. The other cultural shift is actually looking at technologies no longer in silos, but in a kind of combined and holistic way. I personally worked in the UK and also here with some organizations that have an appetite to experiment with some technologies, but they don't fully appreciate how the combined use of these technologies can actually unlock and maximize the value of these investments. So shifting from the power of from the power of work to the power of end is another cultural shift. The other trend that we're seeing, and I would be keen actually to hear whether this is a trend that you're seeing in Singapore and in other parts of Asia, is that despite there is a willingness and an appetite and an urgency to invest across almost all technologies, if we look at the dollar number of investment, we are actually seeing a decrease. But C-suites are actually highlighting these as a temporary measure because priorities have shifted during the crisis. And so we expect this investment to go back to normal and business as usual levels in the next 12 to 18 months. Now, I summarized here a couple of kind of graphs that were quite interesting. So on the left, we actually have a list of emerging technologies, and we actually asked executives across these technologies where they kind of increased or decreased their investment. So if you look at the left side of the slide, it appears that pretty much, the number of companies that have actually increased investment in these technologies is higher than the number of companies that have decreased investment. And we're actually seeing a spike in cloud, process automation, and 5G compared to the others. But if we look at the dollar comparison between the decrease in investment and the increase in investment, we're actually seeing that the increase in investment is not enough to completely cover and in a way exceed the decrease in investment. So in dollar value, we're actually decreasing investment across all technologies. And we're actually seeing a smaller investment reduction across smart analytics, process automation, cloud and multi-cloud, because these technologies are seen as a have-to-have. They're more mature, and they're also seen as technologies that will deliver a return on investment in the shorter term. And we're seeing then deeper investment reductions across edge computing, blockchain, artificial intelligence, and 5G. So I just found kind of, this quite interesting. But as I mentioned before, this is seen as a temporary measure, and it would be great to kind of get your perspectives on whether this trend is actually aligned with what you're seeing in your respective organizations and markets. The other kind of interesting insights that we found as part of our work is that challenges in realizing value from emerging technologies have actually changed a lot, and they have actually changed a lot in a very short period of time. So while between March and April, the key challenge was changing the organizational culture and risk of failure that was kind of perceived as being high from a technology investment perspective. Actually, in the second phase of the survey between May and June, the rankings have completely changed. And now the key challenge is actually justifying the business case and getting commitment from C-suites and boards. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Mainly, the first one is that in some kind of markets, and here I'm referring to Australia because it's the kind of jurisdiction that is closer to me, C-suites and boards actually are not as tech and data savvy as they should be. And so in times of crisis, it sometimes is really difficult to kind of land the case for digital transformation and really get the tone from the top around what are the technology investments that should be prioritized. And the second reason is that around the business case, I've actually been working with large organizations that used to have large pools of cash, basically to invest and experiment with new technologies. And now that the funds available are actually less, we need to be more disciplined around the business case and where we want to put our bets. So this is why I kind of see, developing the business case and commitment from C-suites kind of having actually a higher priority in the minds of executives. The other interesting fact is that lack of talent and lack of data quality and availability are still kind of front of mind, but cybersecurity and data privacy concerns are not actually ranking as high as I was expecting. They were ranking 10th and now in the 9th position in the second phase of the survey. And this is quite surprising because another actually piece of work that we did this year is a global Chief Information Officer survey that actually highlighted that for CIOs, security is the number one investment priority. And if we want to keep our technology safe, secure, and in a way, have a business that is resilient, we actually need to be able to prevent and mitigate cyber risks and cyber attacks. And during the pandemic, we've actually seen an increase in attacks during the crisis. So I was actually surprised to see cybersecurity ranking so low in terms of key challenges. And again, that could be a topic for discussion for later. And then at the bottom, you see here kind of a snapshot from media highlighting that digital ethics is becoming top of the boardroom agenda for 2020. And I'm not sure whether you have come across this topic in your organization, but this is kind of the new hot topic of the moment when it comes to technology. And this is actually part of my day-to-day job at KPMG Australia. And what we're actually saying is that technology has the transformational potential to basically disrupt, innovate, and improve our lives. But at the same time, we are scaling so quickly the use of these technologies and investment in these technologies that we don't have time to take a step back and kind of think about what could be the unintended consequences of adopting these technologies at scale. And so policymakers in the last year in particular have been, in a way, catching up in this space. And in June 2020, Singapore, Australia, Canada, and a few other countries that you see summarized here decided to actually sign up to a global partnership on artificial intelligence because AI is kind of the hot topic of the moment and is one of those technologies where we're seeing an increasing interest and appetite to invest across all sectors. And what this partnership is actually meant to achieve is a common view of what good looks like when we are deploying this technology and how we can prevent these technologies from causing harm to people, communities, and societies as well. The other fascinating thing is that the topic around tech for good and ethical AI and ethical tech in the broader sense is actually resulting in the rise of academia. So there is kind of acknowledgement that academics and researchers are contributing in meaningful ways to the debate. And so what that means is that from a digital transformation perspective, this is not just just a technology play. This is actually a technology, a human rights, a sustainability play. And so in the future, we're likely to see multidisciplinary teams actually working together to shape the digital strategy, the digital journey, and then also deploying these technologies. The other interesting fact is that governments are actually willing to walk the talk now. And so in Australia, as an example, the New South Wales government, which is basically the federal government for New South Wales, which is one of the states across Australia, has published a month ago a mandatory AI ethics charter for all public agencies that are operating in New South Wales. We have seen also an algorithm charter being published earlier this year by New Zealand, and this was actually the first one globally. And in Singapore, the Monetary Authority has actually been very active in the last couple of years. You may come across Project Veritas, where the government is actually experimenting with a few companies, including HSBC, practical ways of embedding transparency and fairness in automated decision-making systems. And they also developed a model for governance of AI. Now, a lot of the debate at the moment is focused on artificial intelligence, but this doesn't mean then the thinking will be leveraged and kind of, used to then approach less mature technologies when we will see an uptake in those. The other interesting theme here is that the Australian government has recognized that not just Australia, but many countries across Asia-Pac will be net importers of technology. And so, as an example, the Australian government has actually defined the principles for critical technology supply chain, which basically means when you are procuring technology from a third party or components, there are a set of 10 principles that you need to make sure are reflected in the practices and in the technology. And security is really front of mind, as well as autonomy of the third party you are transacting with from their government, as well as integrity, upholding human rights, and basically operating in an ethical way. So there is a lot of momentum and energy at the moment. And from a digital strategy perspective, I think that this is a really fascinating topic because it is completely shifting and changing the way we approach technology innovation. And we're actually looking at technology innovation through the lenses of technology for the greater good and technology designed and deployed around the humans. So this is kind of, where I was planning on ending my presentation. And I hope that this has been interesting for you guys and has set the scene to then have a deeper conversation and more detailed conversation with Anil later today.